Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ceviche's Country Club. I am honored to present the welcome remarks today. My name is Ali Sahabi. I'm the president of Weidner Foundation. And as you know, Weidner Foundation is a humanitarian foundation. And to me, one of the individuals that I have admired in my lifetime as a humanitarian is Dr. Martin Luther King. And I want to share a quote from him that he's attributed to 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago. Here we go. When we look at modern man, we have to face the fact that modern man suffers from a kind of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to his scientific and technological abundance. We have learned to fly the air like birds. We have learned to swim the seas like fish. And yet, we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. As I think about this statement that was from 60 years ago, you look around our earth and it seems like it's relevant today. And that's really why people ask me my relationship with Weidner Foundation and why is it that I care about our mission, which you're all going to learn about today. Is twofold. One, at Weidner Foundation, what we do is remembering the fact that terrible things happened in our past. Some of them you're going to hear about today. And terrible things are happening right now. And most likely will happen in the future as part of our humanity. But the other side of what we're about is highlighting the wonderful, the loving side of humanity. And to remember that there are these positive attributes of humanity and human being that have made a difference in the past, like the example of John Weidner and our recipients of our first award, and give hope for our future, that we are about our kids of the future and so on. With that, I'd like to introduce to you our Executive Director, Ron Osborne. He's going to take us down until our dinner is served, and I also, as I'm introducing him, I want you to know that he's 100% volunteer Executive Director, so he deserves a very good round of applause.
Thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge Ali Sahabi and his incredible generosity to the foundation. This whole event is only possible because of Ali and his wife, Aida, who have made all of this possible. The beautiful flowers on the tables, the wonderful music that we just heard playing as we were coming into the room, and in all aspects of this. So Thank you, Ali, for making this happen. I also want to just ask for the board members of the Weidner Foundation to stand so that you can see them and know who to talk to if you have questions about the foundation. Would the board members who are present stand? About half of our board members are here tonight. Tanya Magas is the board chair at this table. Ali is the president, as you heard. Brent Garrity is the secretary, sitting over here at a table on this side. Larry Garrity is, Larry is one of the founders of the Weidner Foundation, which began 25 years ago, and was a longtime chair of the board. And am I missing anyone else? I don't. Glenn, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Glenn.
Easily overlooked.
Glenn has come all the way from Florida or somewhere on the high seas where he sails a boat now to our envy. And gives us great legal advice. So thank you to all of you for being here. The person who I'm really here to introduce you to, though, is actually John Weidner himself. So let me say a few words about Weidner. I know some of you know the Weidner story. Perhaps you've read the book by Herbert Ford from 1966, Flee the Captor, which made him well known to many people. Or perhaps you've never heard his name at all. So let me say a little bit about the person who I've come to know through my work with the Weidner Foundation, as well as research for a book that I'm writing about Weidner right now. John Weidner was born in 1912. He was 28 years old when war broke out in Europe in 1940. Weidner was a man of modest means. He was a textile salesman who had a small clothing shop in Paris. Actually visited the location of his clothing shop just a few weeks ago, and ironically, or interestingly enough, it is still a textile shop to this day. But when the war broke out, the Germans, when they invaded France, they initially partitioned the country into two parts, an occupied zone and an unoccupied zone. Weidner abandoned his shop in Paris and decided to start anew in the city of Lyon in southern France. And around the early part of, 1941, he became increasingly involved with humanitarian relief efforts to support refugees. You see, when the Germans invaded the lowlands, as they were called, the Netherlands, Belgium, tens of thousands of Jewish people began to flee to France, seeking liberty and freedom. Many others had already fled from Germany and from parts of Eastern Europe because of the horror that they were experiencing at the hands of the Nazis. And as a result of this massive influx of foreign refugees who did not speak French, there was a kind of internal crisis in France, and there was a lot of resentment and hostility towards these outsiders. The French set up approximately 7 major internment camps, or really, in a way, concentration camps, where they began to confine these refugees. The largest of them was this camp, Gurs, which you can see an image of on the screen. And before the deportations of Jews to Germany even began, an estimated 3,000 Jews died inside these camps from the brutal conditions, the hunger and the cold. So these were horrific conditions. Weidner was a Dutch citizen, but he had grown up in France. French was his first language. He was familiar with the land, and he had legal standing. And he felt a special burden for all people in these camps, but Dutch people in particular, because he spoke Dutch and he felt he could offer something to help them. And so he got recognized by the French Vichy government as a social worker. He had the credentials to go inside these internment camps. And he began going into these camps providing humanitarian aid alongside others. He was working with the Dutch consul offices, and he was depleting his own resources. He was emptying his pockets to go into these camps and deliver food and clothing to people in desperate need. At some point, around 1942, early 1942, this legal humanitarian relief work crossed the line into illegal rescue work. Weidner began to identify cases in the camps to remove from the camps and help escape to neutral Switzerland, where they would be safe. In the early days of this operation, things were kind of improvised. Weidner was not a professional of some kind, but he had one particular skill set, which was that he had grown up along the Swiss-French border. And so he knew the pathways and the backways around that border region very well. And so he was able, with this knowledge, to escort people and to tap into his network of people in that area to help people get across into Switzerland. He was aided by many people at the Seventh-day Adventist Seminary in Cologne. One of the people who helped him actually was a man by the name of John Zurcher, and I want to just pause right here to acknowledge that we have with us today John Zurcher's son, Fred Zurcher, who's in the back there. Fred, would you stand, please? So Weidner did not act alone. He was building a network of people, but Weidner was the thread who bound all of the actors together in this drama. And when the roads were barricaded and closed because of Nazi patrols, he devised another escape route that was a path that the Germans would not suspect. Immediately behind the Cologne Seminary, where Weidner had grown up, is an impressive mountain known as the Selev. And Weidner knew this mountain well from his youth, climbing on the cliffs and on the trails of the mountain. And so he began to escort refugees down the slopes of this mountain. This was obviously quite dangerous work. And what Weidner was trying to do, was to get them down off of this very steep escarpment, which the distance or the height from on top of this plateau down to the city of Geneva below is roughly the size of the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower stacked on top of each other. He would lead them down these trails or various other ways he would get them across the border. And on one occasion, when Weidner was doing this kind of work, he was actually alone, but he was on this particular plateau overlooking the valley below in Geneva. A truck filled with German soldiers pulled up, and about 15 of these soldiers unloaded from the vehicle with dogs and began to chase Weidner across this very field that I visited just a few weeks ago. Weidner set off on a run. He says he ran for approximately 2 miles. They took shots at him, and they were continuing to pursue him. And he knew a particular point in the rock where he could get down, and he had to get to that point. So Weidner began to look for that point, and eventually, he descended down and hid underneath the steep overhang of the rock. And he could hear the Germans on the rocks up above over his head talking about him and speculating that maybe he had fallen to his death. And he remained there until it turned dark and then descended the rest of the way down the mountain in pitch black. So, on another occasion, Weidner was returning from a trip to Geneva, and he was actually captured by a group of gendarmes. These were French collaborators with the Germans, and they suspected him of being a human smuggler. They brought him to this particular building, their headquarters in the small town of Le Creuset, and they beat him savagely for 2 days with rifle butts until he was quite bloody. And eventually, because he wouldn't speak and he would deny that he was doing anything wrong, they cast him out again. This wasn't the only time that Weidner was arrested. He was also arrested in the city of Lyon by the Gestapo now, the Germans, who actually water tortured him. And again, after a period of enduring this, they threw him out on the street, and Weidner continued his rescue work. At multiple points in the story, Weidner could have simply stopped his work and been regarded as a hero at the end of the war. He had already saved hundreds of lives, but he relentlessly continued to put himself in harm's way for the sake of others. His rescue operation, which came to be known as the Dutch Paris escape line, was one of the most successful escape operations of the war. It came to include not only rescuing Jews, approximately 1,000 Jewish people are believed to have been rescued by Weidner, but also downed Allied aviators who Weidner and his network would help escape across the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, oftentimes in deep snow in very harrowing conditions. Weidner became the chief courier of microfilm for an Allied intelligence operation known as the Swiss Road. But in many ways, for me, the part of Weidner or the stories about Weidner that move me the most are not simply the stories of his incredible heroism, his daring, his intrepid, actions on the mountaintops. It's the more personal stories that you also hear about Weidner. Weidner was a man of deep faith. He was a Seventh-day Adventist and a Sabbatarian who observed the Jewish Sabbath as his Sabbath day also. At some point during his work, he became concerned that maybe it was a violation of the Sabbath to do this kind of rescue work on the Sabbath day. Extreme physical exertion, expenditure of money, deceit, lying, all the things involved with being a leader of the resistance. And so he consulted with his pastor. Is it okay for me to do these things on the Sabbath? His pastor told him it was. But this wasn't actually a satisfactory enough answer for Weidner. And so he consulted with his right-hand lieutenant, who was actually a Jewish man by the name of Edmund Chait. And he asked Edmund Chait, who knew a very prominent Jewish rabbi, can you please speak to the rabbi and ask him if this is acceptable on the Sabbath? And Chait consulted the rabbi and came back, and of course the word was yes. By all means, this is an acceptable practice on the Sabbath. And so Weidner continued about his rescue activities and his resistance activity, presumably with a clear conscience. For me, this just says something about who Weidner was. He was deeply convicted of his own core values, but he also had an expansive kind of worldview. I would call him a kind of religious humanist whose vision transcended his own faith. He wanted to know what a Jewish rabbi might think. He wanted to help people of all faiths or none, and his own network included people of all faiths and none. And it didn't matter one bit to Weidner. What mattered was acting to save people's lives. Tragically, this work that Weidner was doing came at a steep cost. At a certain point in the war, actually in February of 1944, one of the members of Weidner's group was captured by the Germans. She gave away names. And as a result, approximately 100 people in Weidner's network were rounded up by the Nazis, and scores of them died in concentration camps. One of the people who died was Weidner's own sister, Gabriele Weidner, who was arrested on a Sabbath morning for her in her church, pulled out of the sanctuary and marched to prison, and then put on the very last train out of Paris to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. It was a concentration camp for women. She actually survived the liberation, but was so weak that within days of the Russians entering the camp, she died from her sickness. So this was a very traumatic kind of ordeal for many people who were involved. This is a side of the story that I think is not attended to enough. The pain that people experienced as a result of having chosen this path. But Weidner never regretted having done this, and he spoke about that. It was the right thing to do. After the war, Weidner spent 2 years working for Dutch intelligence, basically hunting for Nazi collaborators as a captain in the Dutch army. He became highly decorated. He was perhaps the most highly decorated Dutchman of the entire war. He received the United States Medal of Freedom for his rescue work helping down Allied aviators, and the image that you see on the screen is Weidner receiving the Medal of Freedom. He received the French Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre, which is an even more rare French honor, normally only given to military personnel, but in this case given to a civilian. He was honored by the British government, by the Belgian government. In 1955, he immigrated to the United States, where, for a time, his story faded, I think, into oblivion. Weidner, when he arrived in the United States, landed right here in Southern California and began selling his own brand of muesli from out of the back of the car. Eventually, he opened several health food stores in Pasadena. His main store was here in Pasadena. And he, over the decades, began to receive some other kinds of recognitions. In 1978, Weidner was honored as a righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel. And just before Weidner died in 1994, actually in 1993, he was chosen to be one of the individuals chosen to light one of 6 candles at the opening ceremony of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Each candle representing 1 million Jewish lives lost. And he was the only rescuer who received this honor of being one of the people lighting a candle at this opening ceremony. Before he died, one of Weidner's last gifts or legacies to the world was his decision to create a foundation to continue his legacy, a foundation in his name, the Weidner Foundation. He was involved with the early planning of that, working with Larry Garrity, with Alberta Sabaki and others at Atlantic Union College to see the story of Dutch Paris continued into the future. And so we're very honored that you're here tonight to hear a little bit more about the story. If you haven't heard about Weidner before, now you know the man. For his daring, for his spirit of humanity, for his incredible generosity of spirit, his largeness of soul, John Weidner's name should forever be remembered alongside the likes of Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg. He is truly a giant of the human spirit. And it's our honor to remember him tonight, while at the same time we honor others who, in different ways, recall Weidner's actions. So thank you again for being here. And now the board chair, Tanya Magas, will say a few words about the Weidner Foundation and our ongoing activities.
First and foremost, thank you for being here. We actually started planning this event back in early 2020, and needless to say that the pandemic delayed us a little bit. So here we are almost 3 years later, which is just one of the many reasons that tonight is so very special for us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tanya, and I am the proud chair of the Weidner Foundation. I myself have a very strong personal connection to the Weidner story. Being born in the late 1980s in Sarajevo, Bosnia, I was 6 years old when the war started, and I actually fled Bosnia as part of the refugee program that Germany had put together at the time. That is one of the main reasons why I am lucky enough to be here, as well as many, many other hundreds of thousands of people as well. So I know firsthand how important the work of rescuers is, because just one saved life is just immeasurable. So building on what Ron said about John Weidner, a little bit about the foundation itself. It was established in 1993 by John and Naomi Weidner. We are a non-profit organization, and last year we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Our main mission is to carry forward the legacy of John Weidner, and we do so in a number of different ways. Firstly, through storytelling, really telling and upkeeping the story of John Weidner so it can inspire similar action. To that end, we have published and commissioned a number of different books. We also have now moved the Weidner collection and the archives to the Hoover Institute at Stanford University and open it up to the public for research purposes for the first time in history. Lastly, we're also working on a film project in the hope of bringing the Weidner story to the screen and hopefully reaching the masses. Secondly, we are supporting student scholarships. Bill Urban, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here tonight, has actually started this program and is managing it. Here, an example of our latest scholarship recipient, Gianna at Butler University, who is passionate in working with the hearing impaired. And then lastly, we're all here tonight honoring living rescuers. Now, Michael will tell you more about this in a few minutes, so I don't want to give too much away. And knowing that I'm the only thing standing in between you and dinner, I will wrap it up now, and I look forward to speaking with each one of you more throughout the evening. Thank you.
So he had to hide until his leg healed. And he hid with one of our cousins in the south of Netherlands. He then told me this fantastical story about how he connected with this group of people who were helping people escape from occupied Europe. And his story of going through Paris and to Toulouse, and then he hiked over the Pyrenees in the snow in the winter. And once he got over the Pyrenees into Spain, he was arrested and put into one of Franco's camps as a prisoner of war. And from that point, he was essentially traded for by the Dutch government, which was in London. He went from, they let him out of prison, they sent him to Portugal, to Gibraltar, and then to London. And he passed the exams in London because they were really suspicious of anybody that had come from the occupied countries. And he went to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and he was in the Dutch Marines. He was trained there. And we had a cousin, unbeknownst to me, who was with KLM Airlines, and during the war he was in Los Angeles. So he came out to Los Angeles on leave, and he went to a USO dance at the Beverly Hilton. It so happened my mother was there. And as those things go in wartime, I'm here. And he passed away shortly after that. So I only got the story once. And I told it a lot of times. And every time I told it, I doubted the veracity. It was just too dramatic. The whole thing, hiking in the snow, the Pyrenees, in winter. And it's like, yeah, right. So you fast forward, and you heard earlier that John Weidner was in the natural food business, the vitamin business. And it just so happened, so was I. And I actually bought my private label vitamins from John. So in the late 70s, much to my surprise, because I'd never met him, his salesperson came in and said, Michael, my boss gave me this book for you. So I looked at the book, and it was Flee the Captor. And I read the story, and my dad told me the truth. And it was the verification of it. And obviously, John remembered him because he remembered the name. And I got to spend time with him, and it was really rewarding. And it was a, it's emotional, because if you think about these things and these people and the things that, Mash and Carl have done, and I think people think about these things in the context of a moment in time. You know, this action's been done, and that's kind of the end of it. But that's not the story. The story is that it goes on for generations. So my dad was first generation. I'm second generation. My son is third generation. His son is fourth generation. We're all here because of the selflessness, the altruism, the fearlessness, the willingness to, in a time of madness, stand up to that madness. And to do it non-violently, as John did, and our honorees did. And then to continue that work in the years after. Continue to do that. And the example, I think, is one that you would hope that in a circumstance that you might be in the same frame of mind, your willingness to do that. Just think about that. Think about standing in front of troops who are intentioning to kill all these children, or helping 1,000 Jews escape from what could have been certain death. It's a action that goes on generation. And I think the intention of the prize, the award, is that so many of those people are anonymous. Nobody knows, and in keeping with their nature, at least the way I see it, is they don't look for the accolades. They don't pound their chest. They just go about their life having done something that is hard to imagine. And so it's a personal pleasure to be able to be involved in this, be involved in the foundation, be involved in the award, to honor these folks that are coming up. And I just wanted to share. Actually, Ron wanted me to share it. I was done, but Ron wants me to read this stuff. The Weidner Rescue Prize is a humanitarian prize awarded to living persons who have risked their lives to save, shelter, aid, and protect others in ways that recall the actions and the spirit of John Weidner during World War II. And I think that the folks that we're talking about tonight meet that criteria. The prize jury, which I'm the chair, seeks to recognize persons who, like John Weidner, have fulfilled all of or some of the following criteria: that they acted repeatedly over an extended period of time at significant risk to their lives, without support, without organization, without government, without. It's just what you do because it's right. I don't think there's thought involved. I think it's just I can't let this happen, so I'm going to have to stand up here. Using nonviolent methods to save the lives of persons faced with genocide, ethnic cleansing, political repression, state-sponsored violence, human trafficking, religious persecution, none of which is happening in the world today. We wish. The first prize, and one of the things that we've looking at, we've thought a lot about, is after these situations and the acts that went on and what they did, these individuals, and there are many in the world, what did they do later? Did they continue the work? And as we get to know our honorees tonight, you'll find that they continue to this day, working as they worked in Rwanda during the genocide. So they have, did we put that up there? Didn't happen, huh? Yeah. Okay, I just went off. It's all right. There's the Gisimba Memorial Center, which carries on the work with orphans and children. And Carl will be here to talk about the world outside my shoes, which I think you're going to find to be extremely inspirational and worth you all coming out tonight. So thank you.
I could not abandon my neighbors. I could not abandon my children, children I had raised and who had grown up before my eyes. I see all people in my own image. They have the same blood that I have, and they can suffer as I can suffer. If we had to die, it was necessary for us to die together.
Between April and July of 1994, up to 800,000 people, mostly from the Tutsi minority group, were killed. Individuals like Damas Gisimba were caught up in a mass murder campaign, centrally planned by the Rwandan government. Pitting neighbor against neighbor, they demonized and targeted the Tutsi minority and any Hutu who resisted their plans. The outside world turned away while the genocide continued week after week.
I had always heard the term, the international community. But where is this international community? One gets the feeling that it is very far from every country that exists on Earth. In the beginning, there was UNAMIR, a mission of the United Nations for Rwanda that was patrolling in Kigali. We had a feeling of being under the protection of a foreign force. But when it all began, they abandoned us. They left.
At the time, Damas Gisimba was director of the Gisimba Memorial Center, an orphanage that housed 65 children in the heart of Kigali, where the massacres started.
There were already signs indicating that there would be atrocities. There were Interahamwe groups and other young men saying they would exterminate the Tutsis. They had uniforms and sang slogans. Some threats were even written across the door of my house.
Although he is Hutu, Gisimba was accused of being a Tutsi sympathizer because he did not agree with Hutu power ideology.
During the first weeks, it was children who came in large numbers. Sometimes they would come just after their parents had been killed. Sometimes with one parent only, usually the mother, as a lot of men died during the first days. In the first days, men were targeted. Men and boys. Even young boys. It was only later that they started attacking girls and women. During the following weeks, it was women and girls too, raping and then killing them. Or just leaving them like that because after being raped by 6, 7, 8 people, they couldn't even walk.
In spite of increasing violence, Gisimba refused to abandon his beliefs. He turned his orphanage with a capacity of 60 into a sanctuary for some 400 children and adults.
As far as hiding people, that also was difficult. The number had already exceeded the capacity of the orphanage. Because the orphanage had a capacity of around 60 people, and at its height we were hiding some 400 people there. The militias arrived each time. They were coming all the time, every day in fact, and I was there to try to stop them from entering. They asked the kids to split into 2 groups, the Hutus on one side and the Tutsis on the other. But the children, as I had always told them, they were one. They should be united. They didn't want to separate. And it was difficult for the militia to distinguish between them, as they didn't know them. They would look at their faces, but kids' faces can sometimes look alike. They tried again many times, but the children kept refusing, acting like real brothers. Food wasn't as much the issue as water, because it was very hot and people were sweating and getting dehydrated. They needed to drink, but it was very hard to come by water. There were roadblocks all over the city. They were every 100 meters or so. There were so many bodies from the carnage, from the massacres, that they were even doing roadblocks with the piles of bodies. You understand how difficult it was. But luckily, one day in April, maybe 3 weeks into the month, it might have been the 20th, Carl Wilkens introduced himself to me. He had heard of an orphanage with children in danger who had nothing. Then I explained our situation to him.
Carl Wilkens, perhaps the only American relief worker to stay in Rwanda throughout the genocide, saw his mission to help those in need.
I also told him that we had no milk for the newborn babies at the center. He agreed to help me find it. That was something very difficult to find, with all the looting and all. And we really had no idea where to find milk for the babies. And he managed to find milk and water.
One day in late June 1994, Gisimba left the orphanage to look for supplies. That same day, Wilkens arrived with barrels of water and found the orphanage swarming with militia. Their leader was just getting out of his car.
I walked over, put my hand out, he brushes right past me. He goes to the young brother, and where's the director? He starts, we want the director. And I could pick up occasionally, he'd throw in a French word or so, and then he gets back in his car and he storms off. And the brother tells me, they really want to kill my older brother today. In fact, they're going to kill all of us.
Fearing the worst, Wilkens stayed as long as he could. A few hours later, while the orphanage was still under siege, a group of 7 policemen arrived. They advised Wilkens to speak with senior governmental leaders about the fate of the orphanage.
You got some, hard decisions here to make, because can you trust this man? Some of the police were involved in the killing. Some were saving and protecting people. What do you do? But it seemed like the only route to do was to trust him. The young brother said, "No, don't go. They're going to kill us as soon as you leave." And I said to him, I promised him. I promised them I'll come back. And so it was with this sick mixture of relief and dread that I got in my car and drove away.
Wilkens knew he had to seek help from the most senior Rwandan government official possible. By a stroke of luck, the Prime Minister was in town.
I stood up and I stepped into the middle of the hallway and I put my hand out and I said, "Mr. Prime Minister, I'm Carl Wilkens, the director of ADRA." And he stopped and looked at me. "Yes, I know you. I've heard of your work. How's your work going?" And I said, "Well, actually, Mr. Prime Minister, it's not going well at all." I said, "I just left the orphans surrounded by militia, and I feel there's going to be a massacre. What else do you say but the truth and what it is?" And he stopped and he conferred a little bit with someone in his group, and he looked back at me and he says, "Actually, I'm aware of that situation, and your orphans will be fine. We will see that they're cared for." So, I mean, those kids could be killed that night, and people would say, Wilkens went and told the Prime Minister where these kids were and what was going on. Or he could actually do it. He could protect them. I mean, if somebody had the power in the country to do it, he should have.
Gisimba had managed to find sanctuary in a nearby cathedral. As night fell, neither he nor Wilkens knew if they could trust the assurances from the very government committing the genocide.
It was a big disappointment. I kept saying to myself, I did everything that I possibly could, and now it's finished. I will never see my wife, my child again. I will never again see my orphan children. I will never again see any of the others that I tried to save.
In a country where murder had become commonplace, those at the orphanage survived another night without an attack.
Fortunately, the next day I was told that everyone was still alive. It was a bit of a relief, but I feared that even if they had not died that night, something might happen during the day. Fortunately, after 3 days had passed, they came to where I was at Saint-Michel.
As evacuees from the orphanage arrived at the cathedral, the militias were shocked to see so many adults among the orphans.
All of the militias that were there came by. Where did these people come from? They're with Gisimba? Who is this Gisimba? Are you Gisimba? Yes, that's me. What are all these people? They're with me. What's the problem?
The hundreds of children and adults that Damas Gisimba had cared for since the beginning of the genocide were rescued on July 1st, 1994.
Foundation's desire to seek out and recognize contemporary selfless individuals who served as examples of altruism in the spirit of John Weidner. It's now my privilege to introduce to you its very first recipients of its prestigious Rescuer Prize. Both have emerged from the well-known tragedy known as the Rwandan Genocide 20 years ago, when during 100 days, nearly 1 million souls lost their lives. Among them, 80% of the Tutsi population of Rwanda. On the 25th anniversary of this event, I had the privilege of attending a forum organized by Loma University President Richard Hart, who we're honored to have here with us this evening. The forum was called Genocide in Rwanda, Lessons Learned and Forgotten after 25 years. The Weidner Foundation this evening is determined to do its part to not only keep those lessons alive, but to recognize the altruism of at least 2 individuals whose lives serve as contemporary examples of the spirit of John Weidner. Why did these 2 men decide to remain in Rwanda, risking their lives with genocide swirling around them, when Tutsis and many others were being pounded to death by Hutu militia extremists? One was a Rwandan at home in his own country. The other was an American, a resident foreigner, there to serve as a missionary. As you have heard, the Rwandan was Damas Gisimba, who was running an orphanage founded by his parents. He is notably regarded as a hero after he stood in the way of the militias who arrived at his center, intent on killing over 400 children and adults who had taken refuge there. He was known far and wide not only for taking care of the children's basic needs, but also for teaching them to disregard ethnic labels. Himself from a mixed Hutu-Tutsi ethnicity, he simply saw his mission to defend the most vulnerable at a time when they needed it most, and regardless of his own life and safety. Now too fragile to travel, I want you to listen to his own testimony upon hearing that he had been chosen to receive tonight's Weidner Rescue Award.
Bayobozi ba Weidner Foundation n'inshuti za Weidner Foundation muri aha ngaha mbanje kubasuhuza. Mfite ibyishimo byinshi guhagarara imbere yanyu ubw'iki gihembo mwangeneye. Mu by'ukuri ndashima ibikorwa byiza John Weidner yakoze adusigira umurage mwiza twebwe n'isi yose. Byari bikomeye, byari ibihe bikomeye. Natwe rero twaje guhura n'ibibazo nk'ibyo ngibyo yahuye nabyo ariko mu myaka itandukanye. Twebwe twahuye na Genocide y'Abanyarwanda ya 1994 ariyo yatubereye ikibazo gikomeye. Icyo gihe ndashimira Wilkens twafatanyije kugira ngo turinde abari baduhungiyeho. Jewe nari mfite ikigo cy'imfubyi, Wilkens arabimenya, aza ansanga mwereka ibibazo mfite, abigira ibye, tutangira ubwo ngubwo gufashanya. Hari mu bihe bikomeye cyane. Wilkens yanga kumva iruhande kugira ngo arebe uko mfasha. Ubu kandi mboneyeho gushimira ingabo za RPF zahagaritse Genocide, zikadukura mu marira, zigasubiza igihugu mu buryo tugatangira kumva natwe tubaye abantu, kuko bari badufashe nk'inyamaswa. Mboneye gushimira abandi bose bitanze kugira ngo amahoro agaruke mu gihugu cyacu. Muri uyu mwanya mwampaye sinareka gushimira igihugu cy'u Rwanda, n'isi yose kwimakaza umuco w'amahoro no kurema imitima y'abantu no kugerageza kubanisha abantu mu mahoro. Kandi John Weidner atubereye icyitegererezo, tumwigireho ibintu byinshi. Ibi ngibi mbivugiye ko tugiye twese twumva mu mitima yacu ko mugenzi wawe ari umuntu nkawe, icyo utakwifuza ko kikubaho utagomba kucyifuriza mugenzi wawe. Gutyo wabasha kunga ubumwe na buri wese. twifuza ko yaba ariyo nyigisho twatanga ku bantu bose. Nanone ndabashimira cyane mwese mwateraniye aha ngaha, ndashimira ubuyobozi bwa Fondation John Weidner bwatekereje kumpa iki gihembo. Nyakiriye n'ibyishimo byinshi cyane ku mutima wanjye, kandi ni ishema rikomeye, kandi iki gihembo kizantera imbaraga zo gukomeza gukora neza, kuko ariyo nyigisho dutanga mu kigo cyacu dufite cya Organisation Memorial Gisimba. Mboneyeho no gushimira rwose byimazeyo ababiteguye, kandi ni ikintu kitibagirana gituma abantu bakanguka bakamenya ko kugira neza ari byo bya mbere muri iyi si yacu, gutabara abari mu kaga. Murakoze, dukomeze tugire umunsi mwiza n'ibyishimo.
The American awardee is Carl Wilkens, who was in Rwanda at the same time as the head of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency International. He had already spent some 13 years working in the continent of Africa and became the only American who chose to remain in the country after the genocide began. Not only did he help Damas Gisimba protect the 400 orphans under his care, as you've heard, but also another 100 children at another orphanage, which had run out of food. He went on to move 2 busloads of survivors to the safe haven of San Michel Cathedral, and another busload of survivors from a church to a safer hotel. He will share in his own words an account of what and how it happened. But when the units of the Rwandan Patriotic Front took over Kigali, it was not still the end of his service. Asked by these officials, he went on to help distribute water, food, and supplies to the inhabitants of the country's capital city, to a college where 12,000 people were hiding, and to another camp for internally displaced persons. You'll want to know what motivates a man who is told to leave by his associates, his church, his embassy, and local authorities, but decides to follow the authority of a higher calling in order to risk it all to save hundreds he considered more vulnerable than himself. But Carl, before you speak, in addition to the $25,000 cash prize, which you've already shared equally with Damas Gisimba, the Weidner Foundation has prepared 2 rescuer medallions to mark this occasion, one inscribed with your name and the other with Damas's name. I believe you've agreed to get his back to him in Rwanda. Thank you for honoring us this evening by attending this dinner and agreeing to address us now. So please come.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Stuff's just washing over me right now after hearing my friend Damas speaking there. You're kind of getting 3 versions of Damas and myself. There's the young guys back in '94. I was 36, he was 32. Then the little bit of testimony you heard recorded at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, that was back in 2003. So that's when we were in our early and mid-40s. And I'm not sure if Damas has had his birthday yet or not, if he's 60 quite yet now, and 64. Damas, one of the things that he just said that really just struck with me, I always loved Damas's French. It was so easy to understand. His French was just, my French was, what I learned while there in Rwanda, which was not pretty, but Damas, something about his voice, something about his tone, something about his demeanor that just communicates humanity. Damas just said it was at a certain point that we began to help each other. And Damas really, I don't think he knows exactly what he just said there from my perspective. I know I was working with my Rwandan colleagues to bring food and water and medicine to Damas, and he was, incredibly grateful. One of the nurses that worked there at the orphanage would almost drop to her knees and use words like angel when I would bring supplies, and I would say, no, Trifine, you are the angel, here in this situation. But what Damas gave me, and what he continues to give me, we hadn't met before the genocide, so we met in the middle of the genocide, is this sense of, it's going to be okay, we're going to make it. One of the most important things a mother gives to their kids in times of trouble like this, we're going to make it, it's going to be okay. Damas is really weak in that video. It was just made a couple of weeks ago. Last spring, when we were informed about this award, it was the same time I got news that Damas was going on dialysis. Both kidneys failed and searching for a donor. We were super excited in April when we found a match had been found for Damas. Young lady who had come to his orphanage just shortly after the genocide, and now years later as an adult was able to give back to him one of her kidneys. They flew to India. Rwanda has an agreement with the government of India. Rwanda is not yet at the level of care to be able to do transplants. So this young lady, Damas's wife and a son, flew to India. I believe they were there close to 3 months. And we were so excited when we heard, everything was moving forward, all the pre-testing, and then the surgery, and a successful surgery, and is this taking and everything? And it was a massive celebration when he came back to Rwanda towards the end of August, as they're back safe. The young lady's name is Gisimba, the flower. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes,
anyway, say it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And what a gift, of life. So you can only imagine the heartbreaking news when his son WhatsApped me 2 weeks ago. I said, we just took Dad into ER, high fever and pain. The doctors met, and he had some pre-existing medical conditions. We knew the transplant was going to be risky. So we were, just super excited that it was working, and evidently one of the arteries, the main artery, surprisingly, the spline has been compromised, and he's lost the kidney. And I said to Patrick, his son, who was 9 years old at the time, 9 months old at the time of the genocide, who has gone on and done a master's in social work, and particularly a specialty at Texas Christian University in childhood trauma, kids and dealing with trauma, and who now runs the after-school program at his father's, what was the orphanage. Orphanages were beginning to be closed in 2016 in Rwanda. It wasn't part of the culture. It wasn't the way that they wanted their children who had no parents to grow up, and so they had very aggressive adoption and foster program. But Patrick sent me a message that that the kidney had failed. And I said, Patrick, how's your dad? How's Damas doing? And he goes, well, you know my dad. He's okay. You know, he's telling us it's going to be okay. He's back on dialysis. The awards that were so generously given to us, I was hanging on to mine because I'm like, Damas, we need this one too, this half of that. And but we did a GoFundMe, and we raised, you know, $12,500 so he could airfare and all the expenses. And that's crazy for us in America. We can't imagine what $12,500 would do. But over there, it got him to India and got him a kidney. Now he's going to be back on dialysis. Damas, what I want to share with you, and I should have looked at mine. I was going to start my little stopwatch because I totally lose track of time. Ron, I lose track of time. Counting on you, right? I'm going to guess that I've probably used half the time already. So let me I want to share with you a couple of things that, you know, are not yet written up as such. They're not in, during the genocide, I made tapes to my wife and children. I got the idea about 3 weeks into the genocide. You see, we didn't think it would last that long. We thought the rest of the world would do something. You know, you can't have 10, 15,000 people killed, we thought, every day, and not have somebody eventually do something in a week or two at the most. And of course, this slaughter is going on at an unparalleled scale throughout these 100 days when more than 1 million people are killed. So at about the 3-week point, I started making cassette tapes, recording stories to Teresa and our children. Our children were 10, 7, and 5 at the time of 1994, at the time of the genocide. And so I've always, you know, been a story nut, and so I'm just recording these stories just in case I don't survive. And I remember writing my name and our address in Spokane, Washington on each tape. I don't know, probably got the idea from a movie or something that, you know, maybe if I get killed and the house is trashed, maybe somebody will find these tapes and they'll somehow make their way to Teresa. By the time the genocide was over, I had about 8 hours of those stories. And so finally, after traveling to schools for years, I sat down and I wrote this little book called I'm Not Leaving, based largely on those tapes, and that's the 3 months of the genocide. And there's copies available if you want when you leave. That's why I'm not going to talk much about 94. You can read that part if you want to go deeper in there. One of the highlights, though, I almost thought, Michael, as you were talking about the kind of requirements or something for this award, and we talked about somebody doing stuff without support, I was like, well, I'm going to have to disqualify myself because I had this incredible support named Teresa. And Teresa, if you just have a minute, I can't just be up here by myself and you be here in the room and people not meet you. Yeah, we were just kids back then. And what I will say, I mean, a lot is explained there in the book, but when you look at this through one lens, like the lens of a foreigner, it's really hard to figure it out. But when you look at it through the lens of family, it begins to be at least a little more understandable. And our family wasn't just my wife and you know, the two of us and our 3 children. This young lady had come to live and work in our home from Rwanda. And when somebody loves on your kids, that's like fast track to family. And she was part of the minority. And a young man who came in the evening as a watchman was trapped at our home. The plane was shot down within 45 minutes. They had roadblocks set up. They were so ready for this. This is a coup, actually, that's happening. A coup d'etat. This is not a story of one group who hates another group and eventually starts killing each other. If you wanted to really look at the evidence of how these 2 ethnic tribes got along, you would find so much more marriage. As you heard, Damas's mom and dad were from different tribes. Damas and his wife were from different ethnic groups. This was not unusual. This is not a story of one group hating. This is a story of extremists unwilling to share power, looking for ways to manipulate and control people. And the best way we see it done in our country, and we see it done in history, is you divide. And the most powerful force in dividing is blame and fear. And when we can generate fear and move down into that reptilian brain, that what some call the downstairs brain, the fight-flight part, we do things that we never would have imagined. And so Teresa and I are looking at this through the lens of family. And it's not like our family and the people of Rwanda. Rwanda itself, and specifically these two Rwandans, were our family. And I was there too. We were both there with the Adventist Church, with the opportunity to serve. And if the people ever needed help, now was the time that they need. And Rwandans treated us with so much privilege and so much, just like royalty in many ways, which we didn't earn. And so we're thinking maybe we can use that privilege at this time for these two people in our house. And so I would love to go on and tell you more stories of Rwandan co-workers who I worked with during these 3 months and their courage. Oh my goodness, I'd love to tell you stories of a lady, those who grew up in conservative Christianity, so you would remember stories of what they called witch doctors, and today we would talk about traditional healers. Love to tell you about Sula, who threatened when the killers came to kill 17 people she was protecting. She's got a gourd with stones and she's shaking it and giving them incantations and threatening them with demons if they come after the people she's protecting. I mean, talk about the stories of untold heroes or not having support. But I'm gonna dig into after the genocide. But I won't make you stand up here the whole time. Thank you. One other part before I move past that. In 2004, that 2003 clip you just saw from the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Damas and I were actually invited back to the museum for some events that were happening, and we got a really pretty amazing reunion there at that museum in 2003, the Holocaust Museum. And then I met the assistant director of a film that would come out in 2004, PBS Frontline film called Ghost of Rwanda. So if you want to go deeper into this story, this tragic, heartbreaking story of betrayal and stuff, this 2-hour Frontline documentary, Ghost of Rwanda, would be a place to go. You can still find it on YouTube. And since I was there, this filmmaker that night back at the Holocaust Museum introduced herself to me and said, "We would like to interview you for this documentary." I had no idea what that she didn't even know who Frontline was. I've been in Africa. And so that documentary is what has opened the door for me to get in and travel to schools literally around the globe. And in 2008, I quit my regular job, another testament too to Teresa and her support and strength. And we formed this little nonprofit, World Outside My Shoes, to support teachers who are teaching Holocaust and genocide education. So we've been doing that since 2008. And that, anyway. So here's where I'd like to go with you for these last couple minutes. I'm back in Rwanda. You got a bit of the story there Damas was telling you. Towards the end of the genocide, I showed up with my Rwandan colleague Gisimba with barrels of water, and within a couple minutes we were surrounded by 50 militia guys with their machine guns. They had been there the day before. They had said, "We know you've got Tutsis here." For some reason, they were giving them a warning. Usually that didn't happen. But they're like, "Empty this place because we're coming back tomorrow, and whoever we find here we'll kill." And their typical MO was to find the leader, kill them in front of the people, and then kill everybody else. So they were delayed when they first got there. They couldn't find Damas. They were also delayed. There was this foreigner who was there who actually had a travel permit from the colonel who was in charge of the city, a man who will later be arrested and charged with genocide crimes, convicted crimes against humanity. I was working with the people in many ways who were in charge of the genocide to try to bring help, to have permission to get through the roadblocks to move around the city. I stored some of my stolen powdered milk that I didn't steal it, I bought it from the thieves, and stored it in the colonel's office because I knew nobody would rob his office. So that relationships with the people in power couldn't have done the things we did without those relationships. And so they didn't come in for some reason because this foreigner was there who had connections with some of the top bosses in the city of the genocide. Damas wasn't there. They wanted to kill him first. And I'll let you read or watch the rest of that story. But the leader of that killing squad is who I want to tell you about here this evening. I'm back in Rwanda in 2015, 21 years after the genocide. I'm there with a group of high school students. We're visiting the oldest prison in Rwanda. And I brought these students to Rwanda because they want to understand how did this happen, what led up to it, what happened during the genocide, and then perhaps more important, how are they putting the pieces together afterwards? How are people who killed, no, they didn't kill each other, because this is a targeted one group going after another group. So how did people who killed people live peacefully with the people they failed to kill? People who survived live peacefully with the people who killed their family and stuff like that. It's just, it boggles your brain. And we're in this prison talking to the warden, more than 3,000 prisoners, most of them there because of genocide. He says, would you like to talk to some of the prisoners? And these are sharp kids, actually. They're alum from a program, a high school semester program in DC called the School of Ethics and Global Leadership. So when you talk about how we learn to swim like fish and fly like birds, but we can't get along with each other, we still have schools and organizations that are working towards those goals. And the School of Ethics and Global, these are sharp kids. And so they bring in 5 prisoners. Cutting this short, one of the prisoners is the leader of the killing squad that day 21 years ago, named Gregoire. I didn't recognize him at first. And it was only as they started asking more questions, and then they asked their names, and and the location where he was from, and I'm like, oh my goodness, can this be the same Gregoire that was there at the orphanage neighborhood there, that had been there to massacre all those kids? And then the massacre, as you heard in the story, was stopped by some police officers, but then they were back to again massacre everybody, but that was when the kids were being evacuated. I had asked the Prime Minister, which sounded bizarre because he wasn't the real, they had killed the Prime Minister and he's the genocidal Prime Minister. And I asked him to protect those kids at the orphanage, which just didn't make any sense. But here we are 21 years later, and I cannot tell you how angry, the anger that was growing inside of me when I realized who was sitting across the room from me. I had not processed a fraction of what I had been through. I'm thinking I need to go back and look at my notes. But yeah, definitely by 2015, I had finally started to see a professional counselor and deal with PTSD and all of the trauma that we had been through. But there was so much to unpack. And here I am sitting across the room from this guy who he and his gang were responsible for more than 2,000, just he and his gang, more than 2,000 people. For the next year, I was working on reframing this man. I've been working on, with a counselor and just my own reading. And, I got some of you might know, you know a whole lot more about neuroplasticity and brain, the ability we have to build new pathways in our brain. In effect, we want to know, can people change? Can people be trusted? And this idea to fire and rewire your brain, to build new pathways in your brain, I grabbed onto it like a drowning man as hope that people can change. I'm not the same person I was 28 years ago. Why would I insist that this perpetrator is the same person they were 28 years ago? There's potential biologically for us to change. Now, that's another conversation. I'd love to have it with you. But I'm working for this next year, trying to reframe, trying to rewire my brain to see this man as more than a murderer. I never thought of him as a father. I never thought of him as a grandfather. I never thought of him as anything but a murderer, which he doesn't deserve, if you ask me, to be thought of as anything else. He's forfeited any right to be thought of as anything different than a mass murderer. But I know when I'm stuck in 1994 in that anger and bitterness, it's not just going to be about me and him or other genocidaires. That anger and bitterness is going to bleed into my relationship with my wife and my kids, and now I got 2 perfect grandsons, and it would bleed into them. I went back a year later, and this time on purpose, I went looking for Gregoire in prison. And I thought I was ready to see him as more than one thing. But I was so naive. Okay, we went back in the same office, I said to him, do you want to speak? Because I had first started talking. I drilled him with a few questions the year before to make sure this was the guy. Finally, when I said, what kind of car did you drive? And he says, a green Mercedes station wagon. I knew that was the guy. Now I'm back meeting him again, but he quit talking to me. Okay, there's too much story to tell you in French, and we started working with the translator. I said, do you want to speak in French, or do you want a translator? Second time around. And he says, I think I'd like a translator, which probably is a reflection on my French. But anyway, so we get a translator. And I said, Damas, when I saw a Damas, because Damas is coming back in this story, all right? I said, Gregoire, when I met you last year, I was so angry. I didn't even want to shake your hand. And I don't want to be angry. I want to be able to shake your hand. And he says, I could tell that you were angry. He says, I actually recognized you when I walked in the room. I'm like, really? I've thought about you often over the years. These are like waves knocking me over, you know, in the ocean. He says, I was happy to see that you were still alive. These are very simple phrases. I recognized you. I thought about you. I was happy to see you were alive. But they were massive for me because they're so human. And he was touching my heart, and I wasn't ready for somebody like that to give access to touch my heart. So I'm really destabilized again as he's telling me. And then he starts telling me these stories. You know, he says, and I don't know if this was his attempt at a confession or what. He says, you know, we were trying to stop you from coming to the orphanage, but you kept coming and you kept coming and you kept coming until finally we decided to kill you. Which was really sobering to hear, sitting in the car. I mean, it's not like I'm some, you know, yeah, they tried to kill me. No, I had heard about death threats and stuff, but to have him sitting across the room saying, and then he says, but it wasn't God's will. And I'm about to choke. How can this mass murderer talk about God's? Is that a cultural phrase? You know, how can this mass murderer talk about God's? He hadn't come to me like he had some come to Jesus experience. He still seemed very quiet, very masked, very difficult to read and stuff. We finish our conversation and we stand up to shake hands. And I never would have. I mean, I look back at it and I'm like, why didn't you see this coming? But this seems obscene in some ways. So I always struggle to tell this part of the story. And I've only told it in Rwanda to a few close Rwandan friends because this seems so messed up. We ended up hugging instead of shaking hands. And the hug did not feel creepy or awkward. It felt really human. It felt really healing. But as soon as I stepped back and I'm drying the tears, and he's got his prison uniform and he's drying his tears, and I'm like, you know, this is messed up. I'm not going to tell anybody this. It feels like I've somehow stomped on the graves of these 2,000, desecrated the life, these 2,000 more people that he and his gang killed. And one of the boys I've become really good friends with, 9-year-old boy, and he's now an adult, and he was there and watched Gregoire and his gang kill his mother and his aunt and 30 other neighbors. I'm never going to tell this boy that I hugged the guy who killed his mother. So I was sent back again after that experience to wrestle with that. And I'll just, because I want to tell you, I met Damas after the first encounter with Gregoire. Okay, let me tell you that part real quick. And Damas, I said, Damas, we were having lunch in a buffet, and I said to Damas there in Kigali, I said, hey, Damas, I took the kids to the prison. You won't believe who we ran into. We ran into Gregoire. Now, Gregoire was the local government official for the neighborhood of the orphanage, and then he had his own private militia, his killing squad, that was going around killing he was walking around in the military. He wasn't a military guy, but he got some military uniforms. He had this green Mercedes station wagon, his guys with machine guns and everything. Damas was protecting these children not with privilege of a foreigner like me, not with guns, but with relationships. He had this kind of broken down hedge around the orphanage. And years later when I was visiting him and they had built a brick wall around the orphanage, I said, Damas, look at this wall. This is beautiful. I bet you wish you had that wall during the genocide, huh? Oh, no, he says. That would have made it so much harder for the children to get in. You see, his perspective wasn't about keeping the killers out. His perspective was about the children coming in and being safe. His strategy was having a beer at the local bar, talking with the leaders of the killing squads, maintaining the relationship his father had started years earlier and the relationship he already had for so many years. This was his strategy. And when I told him that I saw Gregoire in prison, he goes, oh yeah, he's there for life. And I said, well, actually, he told us not. His sentence has been reduced to 38 years. I think he gets out in 12 years. And he goes, oh, that must be because he cooperated so much. And I'm like, does that bother you? No. He says, why should he be in prison today? He should be out here now helping us rebuild the country. And I'm like, whoa, this man does not see him as one thing. And he went on to tell me, you see, after the genocide, the Rwandan government tried, and the first words they used to use were to prosecute the rank and file. All other Holocaust and horrors in modern history, we go after the leaders or some mid-level leaders, but we've thrown up our hands with the idea of all of the, quote, ordinary people who've participated. Rwanda went after, I wouldn't say, though, to prosecute them, I would say for healing. Because Rwanda has this, they reached back in their history, and they pulled out this strategy called Gacaca, where they set up more than 12,000 community courts, and the judges were people picked by the community themselves who they trusted. And they're not really judges, it's not really courts, because it's the more than 250,000 people who are accused of genocide. If you want to, I don't know when you'll get a regular trial, you want to confess, come to the community court. And you can confess. It'll be facilitated by these nine judges. And here's the rough model. You didn't even look at me, I just had to look at you. But the rough model, punitive, know who did it to blame, punish, justice. I know that's oversimplification. Restorative, understand the harm, make a repair plan, and then you work towards healing. In Rwanda, they first made it safe. You know who was the lead judge in Damas's neighborhood for this community court of these 12,000? It was Damas. Damas, this man, he said, I sat down with him and the students that time. Damas said, don't pick and choose who you forgive. And I want to use a very simple definition, because forgive can mean a bunch of different things. I want to just simply say to get free from anger and bitterness. That's all. I think that's a universal invitation. I think reconciliation is not necessarily universal, not even safe at times, okay? But this idea of getting free from anger and bitterness, Damas was just so relaxed as he talked about how Gregoire cooperated, told dates and times and locations of people who were killed here and people who were killed there, how he was flown to Arusha to testify against higher level guys. In Damas's mind, Gregoire was still a neighbor. That still blows me away. My own personal journey, I can leave it with this. I'm struggling with this hug, okay? And I'm journaling about it, and I think in my journals, I write, suppose I would have been killed. And my kids would have found a way to get free from anger and bitterness towards the person who killed me. I wouldn't be raising about at the grave saying, what's wrong with you? He killed me. I would be like, yes, you have broken the cycle of hatred and violence and poison that could destroy your lives, your children's lives, and their lives. Now, this is my journal. This is not what I'm telling other people you should do. Let go of your anger. No, it is not up to me to prescribe anybody else. But it started to make sense to me. This unexamined, unconscious belief I had that hugging the guy who was in charge of all of them was disrespecting the lives that were lost. If I wanted to respect the lives that were lost, it would not be by hanging on to anger and bitterness towards this guy. It would be by working towards breaking the cycle of violence. It would be shifting my thinking from a punitive way of thinking to a restorative way of thinking. Letting go of the priority of justice at the top priority and putting healing at the top priority. Letting go of transactional thinking and moving towards transformative thinking. That's how I could really honor the people who were killed and try to work to break that cycle of violence. And Damas is a constant inspiration for me in that. He was in the trenches doing it in those community courts. Had to call court sometimes after 15 minutes because somebody emotionally is melted and is now crying and wailing. And other people like, my uncle was going to confess today. You should have kept it going. And I kept beginning to communicate to you the stress and strains that these judges faced as they were facilitating. But at the same time, the agency and the strength and the growth that came from the community. Not the days of colonization when you were told you can't solve your own problems. Here were the Rwandan people owning their problems, writing, making the solutions, and now rewriting their story. And that is super inspiring to me. So thanks to the whole Weidner Foundation group for your incredible work in highlighting John's story, who, by the way, that's my dad's name, John. Henry is my middle name, so I'm already kind of a good name, or at least I think so. But also encouraging us and inspiring us all to look for those people around us who are putting others first. Thanks.
Carl, thank you so much for your inspiring speech. A lot to think about what you said, and I'm still trying to process. But one thing I'd like to mention to you in response to what you said and your conversation with that Rwandan, the day that she called you the angel. I believe you are an angel, so but we do have an honor of having our Senator Portotino, who is going to present you a proclamation. Before I ask Senator Portotino to come forward, there is a person in my life who also is my support, and I wouldn't be able to do anything without her. That's my wife, Aida. Aida, please.
Carl, I don't think I'll ever read Matthew again, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you again, more powerfully than you captured that today. I mean, I don't know about you all, but that was one of the most deep, poignant messages I've ever heard. So please, let's give another round of applause. We'd all like to think that we're capable of doing the right thing. You know, we'd like to think that. And of course, most of us aren't. And you were. And you are. And you know, to think about what affects one of us affects all of us. And so I just want to say God bless. And thank you for sharing everything that you've done through the genocide, and then sharing your inspirational message. So if you would mind joining me up here, please, on behalf of the California State Senate. It seems I'm giving you a proclamation, and I have one for Damas as well. But I think you give us grace for doing what you do. And we thank you for your grace and dignity and just your message of love and your record of accomplishment. So God bless and thank you on behalf of the California State Senate.
Well, poet Maya Angelou said that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without it, you can't practice any of the other virtues consistently. And I kept thinking about your courage, Damas's courage. And I don't know if it was fortuitous that this program this evening was being held in the city of Glendale, but I'm very glad to be here as the mayor of Glendale and to be invited by my dear friend Ali Sahabi and her former mayor, Frank Quintero. Because I don't know, how many of you, this is your first time coming to Glendale? All right, looks like there's a lot of people who have been to Glendale before, but if it's your first time, we invite you to come back again. If you've been to Glendale before, you know what a wonderful city it is, and I feel very fortunate to serve as its mayor, partly because of the people that make up our great city, many of whom, almost half, happen to trace their roots to the Armenian nation, a nation that has survived genocide. The fact that there is such a large Armenian, people often ask me, why did Armenians pick Glendale? And I tell them it's because Glendale means home in Armenian, which it does not, by the way. But it seems like a very simple explanation that ends the conversation there. But the reason Armenians are in a global diaspora is because of genocide. And I, as the grandson and great-grandson of genocide survivors, couldn't help but think during the retelling of what you endured and what you did to help those children, those orphans, those people during the Rwandan genocide of my own family's history. And of course, I couldn't help but think of all the many Armenians, Jews, Cambodians, and of course, Rwandans. Thinking of you as an American, I have to say I was very proud that there was an American who stayed there till the very end, showed courage. And as I heard your story, I was taken aback to the lessons I learned about my people's history of other Americans like Dr. Clarence Usher, who many people here probably don't know who that was, but during the attempt by the Ottoman Empire to eradicate the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire in the city of Van, Dr. Clarence Usher, an Episcopal missionary and medical doctor, stayed behind to make sure to save thousands of Armenians from massacre. To Asa Jennings, a member of the YMCA stationed in the city of Smyrna, today called Izmir by the Turkish government, who went above what his title and station was to commandeer a bunch of ships in the port of Smyrna and ferry people to safety, much to the danger of his own life, just like Dr. Usher. To Stanley Kerr, who was one of the first people with the Near East Relief who went to what was Armenia right after the genocide to help orphans, try to reunite them with other members of their family who had survived. Stanley Kerr, by the way, for those who don't know, is the grandfather of Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr. And he's a hero to many Armenians. I never met these people who were instrumental in the survival of my nation, of my tribe, of the people who I love and call family. And so it's very difficult for me to hear these stories because I'm taking them back, but I'm also very grateful today because by honoring you and the courage that you showed, I'm able to thank them. I will never meet them, obviously, but every time someone like you, and hopefully there doesn't arise the opportunity for more people like you to step up, I hope that when we say never again, we truly mean never again. But in the absence of that, at least I thank you for the opportunity to honor you, and by honoring you with a proclamation from the city of Glendale and from its many residents who are survivors of genocide, we hopefully honor those who saved us. So thank you very much. I have a proclamation here for you from the city of Glendale. There was two, but I came with one. This is the one for Damas. There's one just like it for you, but there was a mistake on it, so I sent it back. We will get to you, I'm sure.
So, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here for this very, very meaningful event. I am Armenian, and I am at home in Glendale, so welcome here. And our see those ships that were sent to Izmir, my grandfather's family was on one of them. They were rescued to Greece, and then in 1946, they were called back to what was then Soviet Armenia. So I carry some of those scars, but I'm not gonna go there. Carl, I'm humbled. I'm humbled to hear the story. But I'm gonna talk as a mother today, because stories like this scar us. They don't just scar my family, they scar generations. And the trauma carries on. It does, and it doesn't disappear. It's happening today. I'm worried about those Ukrainian and Russian kids today, because they're gonna carry that trauma. And I don't want that to happen. I think we hear too much crime, too many bad pages, bloody pages in our history. But I also tell my kids, you know, relating today, think of COVID. How many people can you expose with one exposure? The same is true for good acts. It spreads just as fast as the bad. So let's celebrate the good. Thank you so much for all those who put their lives on the front line, for all of us. We owe it to you. Thank you. We're humbled. And thanks for being great examples for us and for our children. Thank you, everyone.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Christopher Khajalu. I'm here on behalf of Assemblywoman Laura Friedman. She could not be here. She's currently on a flight, or maybe already landed, in San Francisco. That being said, much like what Mayor Kosovkin said, and behind me, I'm also Armenian, and my family was actually rescued by American missionaries who were part of the Near East Relief back then, taken to Syria, then to British Palestine, then eventually Lebanon, where the French cared for them, and then here we are in the United States. So hearing your stories were really similar. My great-grandparents were orphans, and they saw their parents murdered and their relatives and whatnot. So a lot of unfortunate similarities, but I think and I hope that they become less common similarities in the future. So thank you for all of your work. And I also have a proclamation here on behalf of Assemblymember Laura Friedman that I'd like to present to you.
Good evening, I'm Congressman Adam Schiff, and I send my best wishes as you gather for the inaugural Weidner Rescuers Prize Gala. Although I can only join you in spirit tonight, I want to extend my congratulations to tonight's honorees, Damas, Gisimba, and Carl Wilkens, who both embodied John Henry Weidner's selfless and courageous spirit in their actions to help those during the Rwandan genocide. Damas and Carl are credited with saving over 400 lives during the Rwandan genocide, putting their own lives in danger to deter the militia and hiding Tutsis fleeing the violence. Damas and Carl, your actions are an inspiration to us all, and the world owes you a debt of gratitude for your bravery in the face of immeasurable danger. Congratulations again on this well-deserved honor. Thank you.
Damas Gisimba, you dedicated your life to protecting and nurturing others. And the story of what you did during the Rwandan genocide is heartbreaking and profound. You were fearless in the face of death. You stood with children and turned an orphanage for 60 into a sanctuary for over 400 children and adults. You saw the value in all people. You continue to inspire us to always fight the discrimination and division that too often happens amongst the peoples of the world. Your message of love and oneness resonates, and I hope your story continues to connect with the next generation. I commend you for your extraordinary dedication and selflessness, and I salute you for continuing to bear witness. The world needs to always hear from voices of incredible strength and peace, such as yours. Your story matters. The lives you saved matter. Thank you. Carl Wilkens, we honor you for your compassion and sacrifice as the only American to stay in Rwanda to help save lives during the genocide. Your story is powerful and moving, not only for your bravery and courage, but because it's about human bonds that see through the constructs of human prejudices. Your story and the stories of the Rwandans you worked with speak of the most powerful friendships and what it means to truly look after each other, to protect one another from harm. You have shared so much about the importance of thinking positively, of taking action, and of course of making sacrifices. For many, your story is an entry point to the history of the Rwandan genocide that happened as nearly the whole world stood by and did nothing. I commend you for saving the lives of hundreds of fellow human beings. Salute you for your spirit of humanity and for continuing to bear witness. Thank you. May we all take inspiration and stand up for more peace.
Unfortunately, despite the comments that people made, hoping that the need for rescuers will no longer exist, the need continues. And I thought that it would be, the Weidner Foundation, as we think about future rescuers prizes, is looking very closely at stories of rescue coming out of Ukraine. And I think it would be appropriate for us to at least just briefly hear a small piece of what's happening in Ukraine from a personal friend and somebody who is Ukrainian and who has been to Ukraine recently along with her husband and can share a little bit, very briefly, about what is happening there. And then we will bring this evening to a close. I promise you that this will be brief, but please stay and listen because it's important.
Good evening, everyone. Just like Nadia, I will say I'm the only thing standing between you and going home, so I will be brief and I will stick to my notes. But first of all, I would like to thank Ron for your kind introduction. It's an honor for us to be here. I came with my husband and 2 daughters from Orlando, Florida, so thank you so much. Throughout our history, we meet people who are able to identify crisis and respond immediately. These are ordinary people, fathers, mothers, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons, who do not have any job obligations of saving others, yet when wars, famines, and other crises occur, they have a call deep within to go and save lives. They risk their lives because a life of another human is just as important to them as their own. It is incredible that we have organizations like yours that recognizes such ordinary people who truly are not ordinary at all. They are true modern-day heroes. Today, I would like to acknowledge several individuals we met in Ukraine. They're ordinary people, yet they're doing extraordinary things. Please meet Willis. We're going to have a picture, but I'll paint you a picture. Tall, blonde, young man. He's only 26 years old. He got married to the love of his life in December 2021. Only 2 months later, on February 24, they woke up to explosions. They packed really quickly, as fast as they could. He loaded his wife, his mother-in-law. They got in the car and drove to the border of Romania. He wanted to keep them safe. They had to part as males ages 18 to 60 are not able to leave the country due to war. As he drove back home, he saw hundreds of women with children just walking in the cold February winter. He experienced so much pain and compassion within. He said he felt an urgent call to help, to do everything possible to help evacuate people. He filled up his van, as well as 2 large barrels with gasoline, and drove 12 hours to evacuate people from the city of Bucha. Thousands needed to be evacuated. He contacted all of his friends who had cars and vans and organized evacuation chains. 4, 5, 8 vehicles. They would drive one right behind another. They would leave from western Ukraine early in the morning, drive for 12 hours to Bucha, load up as many people as they could, and drive back home. Drive back to western Ukraine and the border. They would sleep for 3 to 4 hours and do it again and again and again. They risked their lives driving through checkpoints, explosions, shootings, with one goal: to save more lives. When the war intensified, Willis and his team went to one of the most dangerous places, the city of Severodonetsk. As they were driving into the city to rescue people, buildings were burning, explosions, gunshots were heard. There was no life on the streets, dead bodies laying. But they knew that there were people hiding in the basement that needed to be evacuated. When we learned about this mission, we immediately wanted to help. We asked Willis, what could we do? He said that they were in desperate need of funds for gasoline. Willis himself had emptied his entire savings account of $9,050 within 2 weeks of war, paying for gas, food, urgent supplies that were needed for evacuations. When we asked him about it, he simply replied, "The value of money fades when human lives are at risk." One day, when his team was driving in with a van full of people, a rocket had landed only 16 feet from the van. We saw the pictures. The van was devastated, but all people were alive. Willis and his team recognized that there were people who could not leave their homes and were staying underground. They were in great need of food, water, and other essential items, so they began to deliver food, water, blankets to help them survive. Willis and his team have continued to do all they can to help those in need. In the past 5 months, they drove 68,350 miles. They have rescued more than 400 families and have delivered 90,000 pounds of food. We also met other modern-day heroes. Dr. Yuri Bondarenko. He's a psychiatrist. He's originally from Russia, but he was living and practicing in Kyiv. He works day and night providing psychological assistance to those fleeing from bombings, who just lost their family members, their families, their homes, everything they owned. He said, "It's not easy to provide psychological support when you are a refugee yourself and you feel broken on the inside. But they need me, and I will continue to do all I can." We also met 2 nannies, Natalia and Natalia. They helped evacuate 146 orphans from Mykolaiv region. They were separated from their families, from their children, to stay with the orphans after spending days in cold and dark bomb shelters. They continue to serve these precious children. We walked with those children. We hugged those children. There are many more ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And what an honor it is to be able to acknowledge them. I would like to end with this quote by Nelson Mandela. "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead." Thank you. Thank you for recognizing, acknowledging incredible, brave, and selfless people.
Thank you so much, everyone. This brings our evening to a close. As you leave, we have some gifts for you on the back table. There's a book, The Escape Line by historian Megan Corman, which was commissioned by the Weidner Foundation in 2009, published in 2018. And we would love for you to take a copy with you. And if you don't think you're going to read it, take one and give it to somebody who you think will, okay? Inserted into the book is a brochure that says something about the film project that we have alluded to in the program here, which the Foundation is actively pursuing. And if you'd like to hear more about the Foundation's ongoing work and explore ways of supporting our work, because we're always looking for help and support, please visit our website, which is simply www.weidnerfoundation.org. Weidner is spelled W-E-I-D-N-E-R. Hopefully by now you know the spelling. So again, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you, and I hope you have safe travels home.